Now let's talk about the ROPI model. The ROPI model is very special. All valuation models are special, but this is particularly special for accountants because the ROPI model explains how accounting information affects stock value. We intrinsically know that if a company is more profitable, then the stock should be higher. We understand that, and we understand that certain things that go on in financial statements should impact stock value. But it's very difficult to understand exactly how. And a lot of research has gone into determining this. And ultimately what researchers came up with in the 1990s, Olson and Harris, Jim Olson and Trevor Harris were the researchers, and they came up with the ROPI model. And they determined that mathematically, the ROPI model is much more closely related to valuation. I should say more closely, but the ROPI model explains in a very practical way how accounting information maps into stock value. Believe it or not, before around 1992, 1993, no one really understood the extent of the relationship. They knew that accounting is related to stock value, but they had a lot of trouble explaining how. And this model, it's also called a clean surplus model, this model explains how it works. So basically, firm value, according to ROPI, is a combination of the value of your net operating assets plus the present value of expected return on residual operating income, ROPI. So firm value is a combination of these two components. Now we've already learned how to calculate net operating assets. The next step would be to figure out we've already learned how to project residual operating income. So it's a matter of putting these things together. Let's go over what ROPI is, residual operating income. First of all, net operating assets are firm value. This is just what the company has that it uses to make money. And that gives the firm a certain intrinsic value because this is what the company owns. And then what ROPI does is it adjusts it for all the future valuation aspects related to net operating assets. In other words, net operating assets are going to deliver you a certain return, but based on your projections, there are going to be more returns. And ROPI takes this into account. So ROPI would be equal to the net operating profit after taxes, NOPAT, minus the expected return on net operating assets. And this is why they call it the residual operating income model, because it's the residual of NOPAT over what you would expect to make in NOPAT from your net operating assets. So again, ROPI, residual operating income, would be NOPAT minus expected NOPAT, defined as net operating assets at the beginning of the year times the return on based on weighted average cost of capital. And the way you would interpret this is that this is the profit above and beyond what your operating assets would be expected to return. The company has operating assets and they're going to make a certain amount of money. That's what they're there for. ROPI says that there's going to be a little something extra. And that's really where firm value comes in. That's what impacts firm value when we get more than we expect or less than we expect. And that's what impacts stock value. So shareholders expect the company to take its net operating assets and to make money, to make enough money to cover weighted average cost of capital. That's their job. Now, when they earn profits above that, that's where they're creating value for shareholders, and that's residual income. That's really what we want to measure, is that residual income above and beyond what you would already expect the net operating assets to generate. So your steps are to first of all forecast ROPI for the horizon period and discount it. Then forecast ROPI at the terminal period and discount that as a perpetuity, an annuity. It would be an annuity, a perpetuity of an annuity, and then you would discount it back to the current period. You'd sum up all your present values and add these up, and then add them to net operating assets following this formula here. So you have the present value of expected ROPI, consists of the horizon period and the terminal, and then you also have your net operating assets. Subtract your net non-operating obligations. That's assuming that it's positive. If it's negative, then you're going to add it. Subtract any non-controlling interest, and that's going to give you your equity value. And you're going to divide equity value by the number of shares to yield stock share value. So how do you do this in real numbers? Take a look. We have here sales, NOPAT, and NOA just like before. Now remember, for the discounted cash flow model, we just took net NOPAT and subtracted the change in NOA. What we're doing here now is we're taking NOPAT again and we're subtracting the expected return on NOA. So that would be net operating assets at the beginning of the period, not at the end of the period, beginning of the period, times the weighted average cost of capital. So here, your ROPI would be 11,032 times, so you have 70,391, that's beginning net operating assets, times the weighted average cost of capital. In this case, if I remember correctly from the previous model, it's 4.2%. And then subtract that from NOPAT, 11,032. And you get 76.53. And you have the calculation. It's explained, if you're wondering, this whole calculation explained in detail on page 14-8. And you would do that for each year. Remember, it's got to be the beginning of the year because you got to return on what you already have. You don't get a return on your ending assets in order to get your ending assets, obviously. So you would use the beginning. Then you also have to figure out what your ROPI for the terminal period is going to be and estimate the present value of that. In this case, it's going to be 179,566. You see how huge that is? That still comprises more than half of the total firm value. Anyway, the cumulative present value of the horizon ROPI is 28,256. That's the sum of these four figures. The present value of terminal ROPI, and remember what this is. This is a perpetuity, and then brought back to the beginning, the end of the horizon period, beginning of the terminal period, and then brought back through present value to 2016. And then you also add the net operating assets, because remember, it's net operating assets plus all the ROPI. So that would give you total firm value of 278,213. You add or subtract net non-operating assets. In this case, I'm going to subtract it because net non-operating obligations, because net non-operating obligations is a liability, and some of your firm value comes from that. You're also going to subtract your non-controlling interest because some of your firm value comes from that. And you get an equity value of 265,163. Divide by the number of shares outstanding, you get stock price of $99.39. Now, what the book is trying to show you here, it's very interesting. They're trying to show you that mathematically it's all the same. And if you use the discounted cash flow model, you're going to get the same measure. In reality, when you do this, your projections are going to be all over the place, and your stock value is going to be different with each model that you use. And that's what makes it important to use different models, because then you can start to refine your measures and see where your assumptions are that maybe yield problems. So again, the book is trying to demonstrate to you that whatever model you use, you get the same figure. In reality, when you do this, you're going to get different figures, and it could be because of an error. It could be because of different assumptions in each of the models when you're coming up with your numbers. And therefore, that's not something to panic about. It just tells you more about the company, and therefore you should focus on why they're different and what you can learn from that, because this is all a learning process. And there are lots of ways to refine this model so that you can get more accurate measures of firm value. You extend your horizon period and evaluate how long can I really evaluate all these terms for the horizon. How well can I predict the future, and for how many years? What's the proper horizon period? Manipulate your growth rates. Change around your forecast. There are a lot of assumptions that go into your forecast. What happens if you change some of those assumptions? And a key number, you can't underestimate how important this terminal period number is. Again, it's more than half of your estimate, and therefore any assumptions that go into the terminal period, especially the growth rate, are absolutely key to coming up with a refined analysis. So you want to extend this in as many different directions as you can, and then perform sensitivity analysis as I went over in Module 13. Because you want to understand how sensitive is your model and your stock price to certain assumptions. Because let's say you find that it's very sensitive to the debt rate, and the company has variable debt, and they announce they're going to borrow more money at a higher interest rate. That throws off your entire analysis. Let's say terminal growth rate. The company announces that they're expecting a lower terminal growth rate in the future. Happens all the time. Totally changes your analysis. The stock goes from a buy to a sell, and you better run to your broker and sell your stock really fast. Another issue is mid-year adjustment. We're assuming that everything happens at the end of the year. If it's June, which actually is August, if it's June, when you do your analysis, that's not really an accurate measure. And so what you want to do is you want to refine your measure based on when you are. So if your measure assumes that you're at December 31st and it's June, then you may want to further discount all your numbers to give you another 6 months to earn returns. And reverse engineering is a wonderful tool to use to try to understand what's going on. And instead of figuring out the stock value of 99.39, you plug in the actual stock value and figure out what some of the other numbers should be based on that stock value. So what you would say is that the stock value, let's say you want to reverse engineer your terminal growth rate. I think that's a really good idea because you don't know what the terminal growth rate is. And that's probably the most uncertain number in the entire worksheet. So terminal growth rate has a big effect on stock price, and it's very difficult to predict how quickly the company is going to grow beyond 2020. So therefore, what you do is you reverse engineer it, put in the stock price here, and figure out what is the growth rate that is driving the stock price. And then what you would say, let's say you figure out the growth rate is 2.5%. You would say that the stock market is assuming that this company is going to grow at 2.5% during the terminal period. Is that realistic? And then you look at the historic growth rates and you see that companies never grown beyond 1.9%, and all of a sudden the market's assuming they're going to go out at 2.5% in the future. You'd have to say, I don't think that's a reasonable estimate, and therefore this is a bad investment. So reverse engineering is a really great way to identify and focus on the riskiest assumptions.